Very warm welcome to everyone. It's great to see everyone for another monthly session. And I'd like to start by just acknowledging country. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. And we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So we've got a really fantastic session this evening. We've got two very interesting and different speakers. In a moment, we're going to hear from Jeremy McLeod, who's the founder and design director at Breathe. He's also co-founder of Nightingale Housing. And after Jeremy, we're going to hear from Natalie Kyriakou, OAM, who will talk about her new book, Nature's Last Dance, Tales of Wonder in an Age of Extinction. And as most of you know, what we'll do is after Jeremy's sort of spoken, and I know Jeremy's very keen to have it sort of fairly interactive and things, so we will if you've got questions and stuff as we go, just pop them in the chat or pop your hand up and we'll get sort of a conversation going either as Jeremy's talking or when at the end, and then we'll go to Natalie after that. So just introducing Jeremy McLeod. Jeremy is the founder and design director, as I said, at Breathe. Now, Breathe is Australia's most awarded sustainable architecture and design firm, leading the way for sustainable architecture in Australia. And Jeremy's also the co-founder of Nightingale Housing. And Nightingale Housing is something that Karen and I had some association with, which has been it's been a great experience actually. It's a not-for-profit organisation delivering homes that are socially, financially and environmentally sustainable. And they believe that homes should be built for people and not profit. So Jeremy is very kindly joining us from Tasmania, where he's on holiday, and he's just going to chat a little bit and I think just give us a little bit more of a background on, I suppose your sort of ethos and drive and where it's taken you and where it might take you going forward, Jeremy. So over to you.
Oh, yeah. Thanks very much, Steve and Carolyn, for having me. Thanks, everyone, for sharing the next hour with me. Feel free to jump off if you get bored. I think just, why am I here? Why am I speaking to you? I think firstly, I'm a human and I'm an architect second. And I just want to say that, my parents helped kind of forge me, through protests and, like just taking matters into their own hands to some extent. So I did a lot of questionable things with my father on the law side of things, went on buses with social housing tenants to lobby politicians in Parliament House in Canberra, went to untold number of kind of demonstrations and rallies to kind of protect our environment. So my parents, instilled in me a care for the environment and a care for our fellow humans. And they also instilled in me the belief that each of us, every human has not only the opportunity, but also the duty to act when you see something. So I think that a lot of you that are here in the room tonight, our virtual room, are obviously here because we're all kind of acting beyond, we don't just sit down and say, well, it's not up to me, I'm just going to wait for the government to sort it. We're all trying to do our bit. So I think that I've got to, pay a lot of gratitude to my parents, I guess, that set the settings for me. I then went to study an undergrad in building physics and environmental design at the University of Tasmania. So I went from Melbourne to there. I went there for a 3-year undergrad and fell in love with this incredible state and the nature that is here. So Tam and I are down, we tend to holiday in Tasmania because it's still so incredibly beautiful and so raw and so real. I was just lucky enough to be studying under a bunch of people that actually really understood building physics and sustainability. And this was, back in the late 80s, early 90s. So the things that I learned then actually stood me in really good stead, through to today, because the fundamentals, right, that the sun still comes, still moves with the same azimuth in the sky. We still have a diurnal shift in Melbourne, although that's changing, you still need to understand what a dew point is, to be able to, put the right insulation in your building. So
Jeremy was in full flow there. Just see if he comes back in a second. Natalie, you might be up sooner than expected.
No problem.
Just, I've got Jeremy's number here.
Maybe just while Stephen messages him to see if he can come back on and join us. I suppose one of the things that, without preempting him, I think he's going to talk about is how Nightingale Housing really has sustainability at the core of all they do. And I know he'll talk some more, but just while we're waiting, I know we've got a couple of, got both Lyndon and Alex on the call, who are both do some work together, as I understand it, and also some separate work, and both very much have environment or sustainability at the core of what you do. So maybe we could just throw to you for some, just tell us a little bit about what you both do.
Sure.
Maybe I'll leave my camera off, Stephen.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
Then hold that thought.
Great. Yeah, we can hear you clearly, Jeremy.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll leave my camera off. I've probably got relatively limited bandwidth up here, of course. Anyway, so I studied in Tasmania. I came back to Melbourne. I worked in some brilliant firms for some star architects in Melbourne, Nonda Katsoulidis and Carl Fender, and we worked on some very big buildings. But I didn't feel like I was utilising the things that I'd learned, and I didn't think that I was doing the things that I cared about, which is around sustainability. So I started my own practice in 2001 with my partner Tamara Beltre. It was called Breathe, with the fundamental idea that every room would have a window that would open and that you could actually breathe within the buildings. As mad as that sounded, it was at the same time that apartments were being built in Melbourne with bedrooms without any windows, and obviously that's changed now through to sort of kind of some regulations, but architects were drawing those buildings, which I didn't really understand, why anyone would do that. So we started the practice and we did lots of small things, lots of small houses, little cafes. And, I used to try to do everything all at once, and I do a tiny house renovation and I try to make every part of it sustainable, the flooring, the joinery, the water tanks, the passive solar design, everything, every material, every finish. And so I built some sustainable homes for some people. But I've got to say that, sometimes they seem confused or naive, or that they were trying to do too much with too little. And so they kind of drifted off into insignificance, I guess. And over time, I started to clarify in my own mind that sometimes I had to prioritize what were the big things that we needed to do, particularly with limited budgets, and then how could you make the most impact with a limited budget. And so for me, I've spent a lot of time in the last kind of 20 years trying to distill the big problems or the big ideas in projects and trying to nail those. And often we work on projects that might be for not-for-profits or charities or community groups with hardly any money. And so we've got to try and find a way to make the most impact with not much. So in 2010, we did a little shop fit out, and it was a three-month pop-up. And it was next door to the Converse store in Melbourne Central, where we watched them do a 3-month pop-up where they spent about $400,000 doing a kind of visual merchandising exercise, and then 3 months later put everything in the skip bin. And I was kind of horrified watching that process. And so I decided that I was going to embark on this with my partner, Tam. And so we did this pop-up in this retail store out of 100% recycled cardboard, digitally printed, digitally cut. And at the end of 3 months, that recycled cardboard was put into the compactor, recompacted, and went back to Visy to be used once again. So entirely circular in 2010. It was one simple idea, but it became it was interesting to see how successful that was and how kind of magical that was for kids and shoppers and all of those things. And so I guess using that as a kind of as a positioning point or thinking point about how do we make sure that we're talking about sustainability in an elegant, kind of clear narrative as we deliver our projects, I started getting better and better at communication. In 2011, we embarked on a project called The Commons. It was called Nightingale Apartments, and Tam and I and 6 of our friends all put in, about $100,000 each. And it was when I thought that the answer to housing was in design and construction. The answer to sustainability in housing was in design and construction. And for anyone who's sitting in this meeting that comes from the world of finance, you will know that that's not the case. But I didn't know that as an architect. So we embarked on this project called, at the time, Nightingale Apartments. It was meant to be sustainable, affordable. It was meant to build community. It was about a sustainability of reductionism, rigorous reductionism. So we designed a building that we would take the cars out, and we didn't realise it would take us years to fight that through council. We took out the second bathrooms. We took out the individual laundries. We put a killer shared rooftop laundry on. We shared things within the building, kind of using the commons as an idea, the creative commons or the shared commons as an idea. And then everything was good until we needed to build the project, when we couldn't get senior debt to build it because we were 6 architects with $600,000 and we needed $7 million and the bank wouldn't give us the money. We had to go out and try and find impact investors. And that's when I kind of, walked into the world of finance, banking, senior debt, mezzanine finance, development funding. And I started to understand that to build a great building, it's not just about a design, it's about understanding the entire system that wraps around that. I was lucky enough to meet Danny and Barry from Small Giants, who then went on to start IIG. And they were looking for impact investment to make a difference in Melbourne. And so they bought the project off us, and then I worked for them to complete the project. They changed the name from Nightingale to The Commons, which was an apt and fitting name. But that through that process, and having to lose control of the project that I'd worked so hard on, when we finished The Commons, well, it was a great success architecturally. It won the National Award for Sustainability, the National Award for Housing. I think that it was pretty scary for Tam and I to lose financial control of the project, and to not be able to fight for all the things that were really important to us. So some of the things, The Commons is not as good as it perhaps could have been if we'd held the reins all the way through. So when we finished The Commons, I wrote a little manifesto called the Nightingale Model, and it was about the democratisation of capital, about taking one big developer off the table, bringing in small-scale shareholders that would be silent shareholders, and building a financial model like Patagonia's financial model, which was about a triple bottom line outcome. So it capped returns to investors at 15%, which I thought was, more than reasonable. As it turns out, development is big and hard and scary, and a lot of people don't like to put money into development at that number. But we found hundreds of Melburnians were prepared to put $100,000 investments into Nightingale projects over the last 10 years. So it was an idea about the democratisation of capital, about keeping control of triple bottom line outcomes so that sustainability and community were equally as important as the financial return. And then that liberated us as architects to be able to write in not just design the building, but also write in the governance that we needed to kind of solve some of these issues. And so what do I mean by that? Using the Owners Corporation rules to do something as simple as write in a pay the rent scheme, which means if you live in a Nightingale building, you have to pay $100 a year. That's only $2 a week. That's only 30 cents a day to the traditional owners upon whose land your building sits without treaty. And so why is that important? That, you know, for one building, maybe it doesn't matter, but we've now finished nearly 1,000 apartments, and most of them are in and around the inner north of Melbourne, which means that's about $100,000 a year that are going to the Wurundjeri Council every year. And if we could get other developers like Lendlease or Mirvac or Stockland to do that at scale, or, you know, like Mirvac Live, they're about to roll out 10,000 homes, right? That starts to turn into millions of dollars a year, tens of millions of dollars a year, which could possibly enable First Nations Australians to actually buy some of their own land back. So we think that that's a kind of a meaningful thing to do. We write in a resale caveat or a resale deed, which says if you're going to buy an apartment off us without profit, with a capped return, then you can't, you know, what you're buying is a home and not an asset to be traded. And so what that means is you can resell your home at the price you paid, plus the indexing of the suburb. You can't just go and sell it for as much as you want, to make as much as you want, because we're trying to decouple the housing that we're providing. We're trying to make housing. We're not trying to build tradable assets, which is really hard in Australia, because housing here is referred to as the housing market. The entire taxation system, as you all know, is built around capital gains tax exemptions on your private place of residence, which is why everyone wants to own a home. And now 50% capital gains tax exemptions on investment properties, which is why everyone wants to own multiple homes. So, you know, we've got this weird taxation setting in Australia that incentivizes the commoditization of housing as an asset rather than, you know, places for people to live. Anyway, we can talk about that later. I can go on and on and on about the tax settings in Australia. And then I think that the other thing is that we talk a lot about community, you know, and sustainability. So at Nightingale, you know, what are the things that we write in that, you know, and that we use a rigorous sustainability of reductionism. We electrify everything. We write into the Owners Corp rules that every Nightingale building has to be powered by 100% certified green power to ensure that the electrons that are running the building have come from renewable resources. And then we use Nightingale's kind of, I guess, leadership. So, you know, Nightingale went on to win the 2018 National Award for Housing, National Award for Sustainability. Nightingale Village won the 2023 National Award for Housing, National Award for Sustainability. And Nightingale Preston's just won the Victorian State Award for housing. So, and with that kind of, and Nightingale's has a database that, interestingly, we started with a $99 Squarespace website that I got a graduate architect to put online for me, and that waiting list is now at over 21,000 people. So the last time we had a ballot, we sold $60 million worth of apartments in one day online through an online ballot, without a real estate agent, a marketing team, or an advertising budget, but instead with honesty and transparency. So, you know, so people in the housing sector listen to Nightingale. They're fascinated by it. So we use that to be able to talk to housing ministers, planning ministers, particularly in Victoria, where we've got a lot of coverage around things like embedded energy networks, ensuring that they're fair and transparent for the users, that they're powered by 100% renewables, you know, and so we talk a lot about inclusionary zoning, which is to include kind of, you know, social housing with housing development. So that's kind of Nightingale. So I think for us at Breathe, we do architecture, you know, whether it's a zero carbon gin distillery for 4 pillars, whether it's a 100% recycled cardboard shop for a 3-month fit out, or whether it's actually accepting that the housing model in Australia is broken, and the thing that we need to design is not so much a building, but rather a housing system. That's what we go and do. So I think for us, it's, you know, it's trying to be strategic enough to say, what's next? What do we need to do? I think Lyndon Thornley, one of my colleagues from Sydney, is on the call. So he's an architect, very good architect. He understands building physics, sustainability. So, Lyndon, this is the bit that you're not going to be happy about. Over the past 5 years, I have been frustrated with my colleagues in the market generally. I would say market, the housing market or the development market, and I've been constantly talking about sustainability. And we've all been talking about, operational carbon. So the energy that is used to power your home or your business, to turn on your TVs, your heaters, to heat your water. Operational carbon makes up for about 30, well, so actually, operational carbon plus embodied carbon, so the carbon that we use in the concrete, the aluminium, the steel to build your buildings, those two things together make up 37 to 39% of all carbon emissions on the planet. It is the single biggest sector, the built environment, the sector that I work in with my 14,000 colleagues in Australia. That is the single biggest emissions sector globally. And so we've been, Lyndon and I, and there's a group of architects that have been talking about sustainability nonstop since they've got out of university, and trying to get our entire profession to solve both operational carbon and embodied carbon, to do that simultaneously. And for some reason, it seems to be a task that's too big or too hard. And so while states like Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland and the ACT have taken on energy efficiency upgrades in the latest National Construction Code, our neighbouring states, so Northern Territory, South Australia, Western Australia and Tasmania, have all decided not to take on energy efficiency upgrades. And in fact, South Australia are talking about putting a hold on energy efficiency upgrades for 10 years, right? To give you some kind of, it's fascinating, right? What's happening currently. I have been talking a lot in the last 3 years about just trying to simplify the message to my colleagues, to the market, and to every homeowner and to every business owner out there. So I've stopped talking about embodied carbon, while my architects at Breathe, run life cycle analysis on carbon every day, and we've got significant expertise in cutting our embodied carbon. My message to the market has been electrification, electrification, electrification. We have to get off this love affair with gas. There is no pathway to net zero with gas. And then the second part of that kind of conversation has been about, where do you buy your electrons from? So for everyone on this call, if you want to do the best thing for the planet, and you want to do it, and so yes, Stephen's probably going to tell you it's bank with Bank Australia, and think about where your superannuation, your investments go. Make sure that's ethical. What your money does is really important. Some of you might think it's being a vegan. That's kind of number 3 on the list. Some of you might think it's about transport, fly less, take an EV, take mass transit, ride a bike. That's second. That's really important. But the single most important thing that you can do is buy 100% green power for your electricity source. So if you currently are buying power from AGL, God forbid, or Energy Australia or Origin, the minute that you get off this call, if you could all please just spend 5 minutes reading your bill and making sure you've got 100% certified green power. And if not, please call your providers, today or tomorrow, probably tomorrow now, and change that. It'll cost you 5 cents a kilowatt hour more, but it will force the energy sector to invest in large scale renewables. And we've got to be kind of, intelligent as a nation about how we do that. And then the other thing is, electrify everything when you can, if it makes sense. So if you've just installed a brand new gas water heater, maybe that's not the thing that you want to do now. But there's lots of government incentives now, obviously, for heat pumps, or maybe not, obviously, if you're not in that space. So, change your hot water heater. That's 40% of your energy in Victoria. Change that to a heat pump. Induction cooktops, it's kind of effortless now. You can buy single phase, 20 amp induction cooktops now. So there's no reason why you wouldn't have induction cooktops. And then obviously heating, heating and cooling, high efficiency splits with a good refrigerant is the way to go. Anyway, so what am I doing about that? I've recently worked with a really smart sustainability nerd in Melbourne called Peter Steele, who's done a lot of work with virtual power plants. He's now working with the Western Australian Power Authority, and a young guy called Ben Russell, who was an electrician by trade. Both of them used to live in the Commons with me, and we've started a company called Goodbye Gas, which is about home electrification. Not because I want to run an electrification company, but because I was sick of meeting with clients who were finding it difficult to line up 5 different trades to electrify their home. So we've got some very smart people that work at Goodbye Gas, and the whole kind of model is that it's meant to be a white glove concierge service, that there's some smart young woman called Marcella or Jess that will take your call, take you through an electrification plan, and then on electrification day, Ben Russell or Geordie will turn up at your house with a team of 5 tradespeople behind them, and they will introduce the homeowner to each of those 5 trades. Each of those 5 trades will go to work. At the end of the day, Ben or Geordie will call the homeowner and say, is your hot water working? Are you satisfied with the hot water installation? Yes. Are you happy for us to release the money? Yes. Are you happy with your induction? Yes. Would you like us to release the money? Yes. Are you happy with your heating and cooling solution? Have they shown you how to use that? Have they cleaned up after themselves? Are you happy to release the money? Yes. So basically, it's meant to be this effortless thing that we're tucking in behind the incredible man that is Saul Griffiths, and we're trying to make electrification easy for those with money who want to change and do the right thing, but can't bear the thought of trying to deal with multiple trades. So yeah, it's meant to make electrification easy. And Stephen and Caroline, I hope you don't mind this. I'm going to give.
That's really good, Jeremy. That's exactly what people have been sort of crying out for. We'll definitely promote that one hard. That's really interesting.
Well, awesome. So I've got an ask as well. So we raised $300,000 to start that, a year ago, or 18 months ago. Anyway, it's going pretty hard now. So Stephen, if you've got some cash, or anyone on the call wants to come in and invest, we're interested in kind of, scaling that model at the moment. So
that's fantastic, Jeremy. We'll definitely promote that as well around the group. Yeah. What would be really good, Jeremy? Thanks for sharing. That's fantastic. Just hearing all about that. Might just bring Lyndon and Alex in here just to get a bit of a conversation going. You okay with that?
Yeah, Lyndon's going to kick the legs out from under me, so bring him in. Absolutely.
Lyndon, do you want to just comment a bit about what Jeremy's been saying, add a bit to it?
Sure. I think what's really interesting listening is that, I think Jeremy and my story is not that different from where we started. And, I very much, I became an architect after listening to Glenn Murcutt and Peter Stutchbury and a lot of those architecture superstars in Australia talking about touching the earth lightly and environmental design. And, I spent 13 years trying to design buildings that were as sustainable as possible with locally sourced materials and, geothermal ground loops and all these things that are meant to make a building more sustainable. And, those projects take a lot of effort and a lot of care and quite significant budgets to make them happen. And when it came to setting up my own practice, I was working in a position of doing quite small projects where I didn't have those budgets, and I didn't really have the opportunity to float an idea that meant putting in some of the infrastructure that we had been putting into projects. So we also had an increasing request with Sydney's climate changing for projects to be air conditioned, and people's lack of tolerance for either heat or humidity. And I was starting to notice that in our projects, we were starting to have moisture and humidity problems because of those houses being sealed up and not being ventilated. So, you know, every building we design takes, you know, passive solar design principles very, very seriously. And we're very, very careful to make sure that there's that openable window in every room, and that we think about our orientation and how we're going to get heat gains and heat losses. And what we do a little bit differently now is that we calculate those heat gains and heat losses and use a tool called Passive House to calculate them. Not every project can achieve a Passive House standard. It's not right for every project, but it's a really, really useful measurement tool for making decisions about the design and the materials that we use. And it gives us a way of prioritizing what's really important for a project. So in my ideal world, we end up with a healthy, comfortable home that is all electric, and that ideally produces about as much energy as it uses. And that's going to result in a house or a building that has a minimal impact. And then, you know, that's what we do for private clients. And then I think where the bigger application of this sort of work is actually on particularly retrofit of larger apartment buildings and how we can determine ways to improve the performance of existing apartments to make them use significantly less energy. So a good example of that is some joint work that Alex and I have been doing on 3-story walk-up apartments, where we've worked out that for one that we've spent a lot of time studying, by externally insulating the building, adding some better windows, adding heat recovery, ventilation system, and a very modest scale air conditioning to each apartment, we can reduce the energy that's required to keep that building at 20 to 25 degrees and 60% humidity by about 94%.
Wow.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Mm.
So, you know, that's all very nice for the person living in the apartment, but where its bigger application is actually at a suburb-wide scale. So here in Camperdown, you know, we recently had an announcement for 8,000 homes at the end of our street, and continuing on down to Leichhardt. Absolutely necessary homes that we all need. But, you know, if we're going to make room for that, the infrastructure that's required for those homes is absolutely massive, particularly if we're not going to make them miserly about the energy that they need. And we are talking about extreme heat scenarios that are going to require cooling. And if they're not well oriented and they're not well shaded, lots of cooling. So if you don't get the energy performance of those buildings right, we end up with a grid that fails right at the moment where we need everyone to get some cooling. Mm-hmm. So my big interest is in working out how we find ways to improve the performance of buildings, to make them healthy and comfortable, and to use less resources. And the payback to the community on that is that we need a smaller infrastructure to make them happen. And I think we also end up with a community that, you know, has less health issues and probably better productivity as a result, although it's very hard to measure that. So, you know, I absolutely take my hat off to the work that Jeremy's done. It's his persistence and tenacity to deliver what he has and find alternate ways of finding vehicles to do things is amazing. And it's, you know, it's totally changed our industry, the fact that he's put that effort in with his team. And, you know, hopefully we can build on that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lyndon. That's fantastic. Alex, I might just bring you in. Any comments from you just around what Jeremy was talking about, moving away from gas as well, and just any thoughts around that one?
I 2,000,000% agree with Jeremy and his push in that particular direction. And I suppose making sure you're utilising green power is a great way to invest in green power. I think one thing that I'm interested to hear from Jeremy is, I suppose, in terms of transitioning Australia to a green energy infrastructure, we need to reduce our peak load. So I think there's the investment required in making a shift from non-renewables to renewables, but also there needs to be an efficiency as to how we use the energy. And I suppose within the building space, that's where we look at the building efficiency to drive down that peak load, especially air conditioning load. And there's lots of graphs that you can have a look at that. I suppose my question to you, Jeremy, is with the government slowing down the increases in NatHERS, how much do you think that's slowing down the transition to a greener grid?
I think that, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Like NatHERS, you know, for anyone that doesn't know, talks about, yeah, how much energy it takes to heat or cool a square meter. You know, what's the thermal efficiency per square meter of a home? The challenge that we've got, I mean, you know, Alex and Lyndon would know this, is that in Australia, we build the biggest housing on earth. So we build bigger housing than the United States and Canada. So in a climate crisis, in a cost of living crisis, in a housing crisis, our solution is to build the biggest housing in the world and wonder why it takes too long and why it's unsustainable. So, you know, I think, you know, Alex, you know, like if I'm working in South Australia, you know, where the government's become recalcitrant around that, then, you know, I push for, you know, for a smaller footprint, you know, like because it's sometimes very challenging to talk to, you know, I work a lot in, you know, social housing or affordable housing or, you know, multifamily housing, you know, apartments for developers. And it becomes very difficult when I try to push beyond 7 stars. You know, everyone gets very tense about, you know, what does that mean for the cost of the building? It's very, you know, the three of us all know that you can use passive design principles, you know, get your windows right, shade them where you need to, get the orientation of the building right. And it's a walk in the park, right, to get 7 stars. Whereas all of my developer clients think that sounds like an absolute nightmare in South Australia and Perth. And so, you know, sometimes we're just a bit cheeky and we just kind of, you know, try to get the sizes right so that if we're stuck with something that's only 7, like for us, 7 stars is low, you know. So I think that size is really important. So the average size of an Australian home, for everyone listening out there, is 236 square metres. The average size of a home in the UK is just over 100 square metres. So 230%, 2.5 times the size of, you know, like we're the same size humans, right? It's nuts. So I think that size is really important. On the grid, Alex, like, you know, yes, we need to build more efficiently. We need to build smaller homes. We need to build what people need, what not people want. But I think that the elephant in the room is, you know, data centers, is cloud storage, is, you know, the incredible energy consumption from AI. You know, what's happening in the digital space will eclipse what's been happening in the industrial space. And obviously that there is going to be, with data storage, that's going to be kind of a big base load. And with AI usage, that's going to be peak demand times from when people wake up in the morning through to kind of, you know, when people are going to bed at night, you know. So we're going to have massive peak loads during the middle of the day. So God knows how we're going to solve all of these things. That's for sure. But you can't run a data center on gas. That's one thing that I do know. So that's the upside. So what I am encouraging all of our clients to do, anyone who's got a house with a roof, we're saying put solar on. If you've already got solar, we're saying go and get Albanese's battery, you know, money and go and put a battery in. And so we're specifying generally 120% solar and 120% battery storage. Stephen and Caroline, where I've signed up with a company called Reposit, which is one of the virtual power plant companies. And so while I paid for the CapEx on my solar and battery, I've signed up on a 7-year no bill guarantee. So Reposit basically takes the risk if I use too much power. They'll just cover my cost, but they make their money not by selling me solar or batteries, but by selling my electrons into the market that Alex is talking about. So when there's a peak demand from someone else, they sell my electrons into the market at peak demand time to flatten out the demand curve. So I think that, as a starter, Alex, it's one thing that we can all do, right? If everyone's got a battery that's subsidised 30% by the federal government, everyone with a house that has the space to do that, that's a short-term fix. God knows how we're going to deal with the broader demand when everyone moves to EV.
Thank you so much. I don't know whether we're coming away with more answers or more questions after this.
It's more questions, Caroline, that's for sure.
Natalie,
Natalie's going to give us the answers. It's all good.
No pressure, Natalie. Oh, look, I think we could probably keep talking for probably in the same time or almost all night. We've certainly covered a lot in a short space of time. It's so impressive to hear what you're all doing. And Jeremy, thank you so much for
thanks,
covering everything from the democratization of capital to role of community housing, getting in front of those housing and planning ministers, electrifying everything. I love the sound of Goodbye Gas, and I want to think how Sydney might be able to do that too. So many things to think about, and also great to hear what's happening on the ground with Lyndon and Alex. We're in the same shared office space, and they're always very busy, but I don't always know what they're working on. So great to hear more about it. Thank you for joining us too. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Natalie Kyriakou. Natalie, thank you for joining us. Natalie Kyriakou, OAM. She's going to talk to us about her new book, Nature's Last Dance, Tales of Wonder in an Age of Extinction. Natalie was awarded the Medal of the Order of Australia and the Forbes 30 Under 30 honour for her services in wildlife and environmental conservation in 2018. She was a United Nations Environment Program Young Champion of the Earth finalist. She's the founder and chair of My Green World, a board director at the Foundation for National Parks and Wildlife, and a board director at Care Australia, among many other things. We've loved getting stuck into her book. I hope I can do it justice. It's such an amazing read. There's obviously so much research and incredible effort put into it. It's easy to read, but it's packed full of really, strong arguments and fantastic stories. But I'm not going to say any more. I'd like to hand over to Natalie, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real thrill to be here. I thought I'd just start by sharing a little bit about myself. So I spent my late teenage years getting rejected from every job that I ever applied for, and on one occasion from a job that I didn't apply for. And so very early on in my life, I was faced with some pretty undeniable evidence that I was both unskilled and just wildly undesirable to the entire labour market. And so I decided to just do things that I was immensely passionate about and hope for the best. And that's when I became what every parent dreams their firstborn child will become. And I became a full-time volunteer. But I had to, of course, beg charities to let me volunteer and let me work for free. But then soon I also became a university student. So that meant that not only was I not being paid to work, I was also paying to learn. But my original intent was to be a journalist. So I wanted to report on environmental crimes and human rights abuses. So I completed a bachelor degree in journalism and then had I was about to start my master's degree in international relations. But before I started my master's degree, I spent a few months in Sri Lanka, and then also a few months volunteering in the jungles of Borneo, where I was working with orangutans that had been heavily impacted and orphaned by palm oil. And after my experiences working with wild species abroad, I returned to Australia, and I just felt really frustrated with the limited amount of emphasis that on nature across, politics, education, and society in general. So I started my master's degree, but at the same time, I also decided that I was going to start a passion project. And that passion project was a mobile game app. And mobile game apps, I mean, this was quite a long time ago. This was maybe 12 years ago, and mobile game apps weren't that easy to build back then. And I had no money because if, my aforementioned unskilled lifestyle. But essentially, I ended up building this app that encouraged virtual wildlife conservation through game technology, and it was for kids. And so kids could become virtual conservationists, and the game promoted 18 charities around the world, and each action, or kids could sort of build their own world like Sims, but they could rescue wildlife, clean up oil spills and rubbish and things like that. And they could meet the world's most endangered species. But each action that they took in the app represented a real life scenario, and they could connect with the charity that supported each species. So it had these sort of, it was a way for kids to feel like they were really, or to actually connect with real world conservation efforts. Anyway, soon this ended up expanding into a fully fledged charity, which provided kids and schools and parents with educational resources on all things related to wildlife and the environment. And we even had an 8-year-old on our advisory board so that kids had a strong voice in determining the future of their education. But just to give you a sense of my passion and my perhaps naivety at the time, I threw everything into this mission. So I was lucky enough, I guess, that I was a lot of rungs off becoming homeless. I had my parents that I could live with. But I sold my car, moved back home with my parents, and I put my life savings, which wasn't a huge amount, into establishing my charity, My Green World. I ran fundraisers and garage sales. I sold my clothes on eBay. And then I used to Google the term very rich people, and then I would email those rich people and ask them for money, and they didn't they didn't give me money. But after about 6 years of university, I graduated with a bachelor degree and a master's, a lot of experience as a volunteer. I had 2 part-time paying jobs, and I was the benevolent leader of an accidental charity that I was essentially paying to operate through the funds raised from garage sales. And so over the years, I became increasingly interested in the forces shaping environmental destruction. I ended up working quite a lot with nonprofits. My career expanded from those sort of early days, but I was really curious about the systems and the power dynamics that determine which voices are heard and which voices aren't, which dictated which forests fell or why forests fall, whether a species survived or vanished, the systems that allowed certain communities to flourish and certain communities to be forgotten. And this was something that I trained in. I wanted to immerse myself to understand the systems that shape our society and that ultimately lead to harm to nature and communities. And so I worked with corporations, with governments, communities and nonprofits, both in Australia and abroad, to try to better understand how these systems function. And surprisingly, this all led somewhere. And today I'm privileged to have a career that I never could have imagined, and one that brings me a deep sense of pride that's rooted in impact and love for the world. And this year I've been able to channel all of that into my book, my first book, Nature's Last Dance. And it has been, this book, it was writing, it was the greatest joy of my life. It's a provocative exploration of power and politics and culture and what it means to be human on a planet in crisis. So it charts the relationship between humanity and nature, but it's told through a range of quirky stories, sometimes joyful stories, sometimes irreverent stories, sometimes tragic stories. So, I describe survival of the fittest through the Emu War, when Australia lost a war to a flightless bird twice. I talk about how Costa Rica abolished its army and became a country of peace and nature. I make the link between bonobo clitorises and feminist movements and misunderstandings of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. And so this book, I hope, reveals the profound and surprising ways that humans and the natural world are intertwined, but it also has a very strong call to action and guides for people to help shift some of these destructive systems that we are seeing at the moment that are driving environmental harm and harm to communities. But I know we are up against some pretty big barriers at the moment, but I thought I would try to share some positive stories. And what, like, for me, one of the most unexpected and extraordinary things about this book has how it's made me feel more inspired by the environmental community or people like you than I ever have before. I interviewed people who, through the book, the people I interviewed, they were just incredible. I interviewed a woman who spent Christmas Eve dangling upside down inside a stormwater drain to save a lorikeet. People who have taken ministers to court over coal mines, people who have started mass movements for the environment, people who have fought to give nature rights. I interviewed a 12-year-old girl who's a forest defender and citizen scientist working with the Bob Brown Foundation. And then even following that, since releasing the book, I've had people reach out to me to tell me all of the ways they're protecting the environment. They've told me that they're not giving up. They've told me about their children who are already dedicating their lives to the service of nature. I'm just receiving story after story of these people who are doing just the most extraordinary things to protect their communities. And the sad thing is, most people never get to hear these stories. They're not visible, and I think I just hope I hope people know just how many people are out there, and we just really need to connect and find each other. But I was hoping that, and I might have a few more minutes, I was hoping just to read you a small extract from the book, both to just show you how grateful I am to people like you, but also to show how powerful we are as a community of environmentalists, which is all of us. Because I think environmentalists really, they're some of the most dedicated, resilient, inspiring and committed people I've ever had the privilege of working with. So hopefully this does you justice. So is that all right if I just read a little extract? So for context, in the year 2000, a cargo ship sank off the coast of South Africa, spilling oil into the ocean. And let me just get my book up. And the spill was in the feeding and breeding grounds of nearly half of the world's total population of African penguins. And the clumping effect of the oil was rendering the penguins' wings useless. So they weren't going to survive. And so this is an edited extract of my book. News of the oil spill began to trickle through nearby communities. The future of Africa's only penguin species was in danger. 75,000 African penguins faced immediate threat from the spill. What happened next was one of the most remarkable wildlife rescue missions in history. It started with one phone call and then another. Then right across the world, phones started ringing. Messages chimed between communities, countries, and continents. Emails were sent, supplies were gathered, cars were fueled, flights were booked, cleanup crews were dispatched. Zoo and aquarium staff woke at all hours of the night, alerting one another. Brazil, Ireland, New Zealand, Australia, France, Germany, Poland, Singapore, Canada, Hungary, the Netherlands, the UK, and the US all heeded the call and all rallied their teams. Networks of volunteers mobilised, charities assembled. The Department of Environmental Affairs arrived, IFOR arrived, WWF arrived, International Bird Rescue arrived, the Red Cross arrived. A call to arms had been made, and right across the globe, people roused from their beds and they came. They were readying to save the African penguin. And then came the volunteers. They descended upon South Africa. They came en masse from every corner of the planet. Cape Town was ground zero, and the world was coming to help. Mums and dads, grandmas and grandpas, children of all ages, students, locals, tourists, doctors, nurses, the young and the old, the experienced and inexperienced. They came alone, they came in groups, they came in sneakers, they came in designer clothes and in wetsuits and in business suits and in dresses. The fishermen showed up, the medics showed up, the media showed up, the chefs showed up, the school kids showed up. They arrived on foot and in cars and on bikes and in planes and on boats and in helicopters. They travelled through the night across all time zones. They brought food and they brought drinks. They brought spray bottles and toothbrushes, wash tubs and garden hoses. They came with towels and heat lamps, with syringes and needles and catheters and ointments and vitamins. They came with wheelbarrows and forklifts and pallets of frozen fish. They came with rubber gloves and tables and chairs and clipboards and two-way radios. They came and they kept coming. Local fishermen took to cleaner waters to catch fresh fish for the oiled penguins. The Red Cross bandaged and stitched fingers shredded from force-feeding penguins. The South African Air Force installed wiring, lighting, and ventilation systems. Ferries, which usually shuttled tourists, carried boxes of oil-soaked penguins to safety. People in ski boats sped across the water with boxes of birds under their arms. Locals set up hotlines for potential volunteers. In July, 6 people answered 28,346 phone calls from those wanting to help. They spoke with people as young as 6 and as old as 96. A 7-year-old girl donated the contents of her piggy bank to the penguins. Australians knitted sweaters for birds and shipped them across the ocean. This was the largest volunteer workforce ever assembled. And the volunteers kept coming every day for months and months. They kept coming. Some were experienced, but most had never handled birds. They fed penguins and washed them with toothbrushes and scrubbed oil off thrashing bodies, and they swam penguins in makeshift pools. They cleaned pens and they set up tents and they worked all hours of the night. All in all, 45,000 people showed up, donating more than 500,000 hours of their time to save the penguins. And it worked. 40,000 African penguins were saved. 90% of oiled birds that were captured were rehabilitated and released back into the wild. The call for help was answered. The world had showed up for one little penguin. It happens, you know, these people, they're everywhere. These incredible, beautiful, kind people who show up, who give everything. All over the world, people are showing up for wild species and environments. On the front lines of the environmental crisis, a hidden army marches, quietly gathering in every corner of the planet. They are a force that spans continents, an unstoppable movement of ordinary individuals doing extraordinary things, mostly as volunteers. Thank you.
That's fabulous, Natalie. Thank you so much. Wow. Almost brings a tear to your eye, that one. It's just amazing. Yeah. It's just the power of stories, isn't it? Do you want to just talk a little bit about that? I mean, it's amazing how those stories move people, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a really emotional process writing the book. I cried the whole way through it, and I've cried ever since writing it, to be honest. I have interviews, I cry. I mean, literally the first 3 weeks after writing the book, my publisher was almost embarrassed for me because she could not take me anywhere without crying, because I didn't expect to be so moved by the process, by the people. And also what was really interesting was I thought, you know, I'm putting a book out there, and I thought, oh God, there's so many other people that should have books in the world, and that, you know, why me? But how many people have rallied around it, because they don't care who writes it. They just want a nature book on the shelves. They just anything that will help these messages get to more people. And the intent of the book was to reach a mainstream audience. I fear that sometimes we live in a little bit of a bubble, and we might be preaching to the choir. And I wanted to see if I could try and get some quirky stories in this book, and or stories of communities that really resonate with people, that can that reach people that might not usually engage with environmental issues. And I wanted to try to capture the complexity of our relationship with nature, and that is one of joy and wonder, but it is also one of tragedy and hilarity. So yeah, but I think my favorite part of writing this book was certainly interviewing and talking to people informally and formally, and I just continue to be astounded by the lengths people are going to.
Yeah, definitely.
successful do you feel? I mean, I know it's early days, but how successful do you feel the book is, or this process is, in getting to people who maybe aren't engaged yet, or maybe are just don't know what to do, or they're kind of a bit engaged?
The book has had, I mean, it's in terms of like through, I'd say as a nature non-fiction in Australia, it's probably gotten the most media attention this year of any. It's up there with top non-fiction in terms of media publicity, which is a really great sign because I mean we can't force the media to tell these stories, so that it has received mainstream media coverage where I'll have to use a quirky hook to get into mainstream media, but the messages are for people to engage with nature. I've received a lot of messages from people who don't traditionally read nature books, and they've been reading it and sending it as gifts to their friends. I mean, talks about making it into a TV series, which would then allow for even more impact. If we can turn these sort of, I think I'm really focusing on the quirky stories and the stories of joy. I think right now a lot of people are starting to switch off a bit because they're only seeing bad news. So, I mean, it's never going to sell as well as a romantasy novel. Fiction, it's really hard to sell non-fiction. The sales are, it's going to be a constant uphill battle to sell well. But it's already, I think, it's being talked about and doing much better than I ever could have imagined. And it's just, I think if I can get it into schools as well, that could be quite powerful for high schools, maybe not, not too young, because there's some raunchy animal stories in there. And but yeah, so I think it's got a long tailwind as well. This is something that I can push for quite a long time. But also, I just hope, even for people within our community, I hope there are stories in there, or even research in there, or resources in there that might help you communicate your work, or even just feel a sense of hope or solidarity.
And how optimistic are you for the future? Looking to the future with a nature lens?
I alternate, because when I was writing the book, I was feeling okay, and then as soon as I finished writing the book, right when I was writing the epilogue of the book, there was a few elections that took place globally that I wasn't super happy about, and so then I thought maybe the end of the world was here. But no, I do have hope. I think we see a lot of bad, but I think most of the bad is concentrated within a handful of bad actors, and that I do think majority of people, they care about their communities, they care about their family, and they want to do good, and they want to do that despite living in a world that has systems that encourage them to be bad. I am hugely in favor of us making more concerted effort to shift some of these underlying systems and asking questions, broadening the amount and the type of questions we ask. So we tend to get into these narrow debates in Australia where it's like, should we have nuclear or no nuclear? And we fight over that, and that's all we talk about. And of course, we need to have those conversations, but also conversations around, who does the economy work for? Does it actually work? Is this, I mean, who is this economy harming, and who is it privileging? And is this the best that we can do? Because right now I'm seeing an economy and thinking, I don't think this works for the majority of people. It certainly doesn't work for our health and well-being. It doesn't factor in young people and their futures. It doesn't factor in nature. So who is it working for? And so whether it's, can we broaden some of these conversations, or why I don't think that politics, when we talk about bad behavior in politics or corruption in politics, I don't accept that is just the way it is meant to, that is just the way it is. I just don't accept that when the answer to things is that's the way it is. I'm like, no, I think we need to be changing the underlying systems, and I actually have faith that can be done, and I think that is done through communities. What I learned through this book is that the most sweeping changes, and I know we've seen this with the renewable movement as well, it is on the ground, it is grassroots, and it is community led, and it is from reaching across aisles and finding commonality. It is not from, you know, screaming at each other in the comment section of social media post. So I think if we can connect better as communities and find common ground, that's where I put a lot of faith.
Yeah, totally agree.
I feel like you might have answered the last question we had, which was what can we all do? Reach out and find commonality by the sound of it.
Yeah, fantastic. Totally agree.
Well, thank you so much, Natalie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really interesting to hear
Really great.
more about your philosophy and the background in the book and what the journey's been as well for you. And I think we all would really very much wish you the best with the book and also just the wider path that you're on, doing so many amazing things. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Natalie. Great. I think that will wind things up there. So thanks to everyone for joining us. What a great session we've had tonight. So very inspiring on lots of fronts. Hope you've all enjoyed it. We're just lining up a couple of speakers for the end of the year for November and December. Next session's on Monday, November the 17th. So hope you can join us then. And yeah, hope you have a good week ahead. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Great
Thanks,
to see you.
everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks, Natalie.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks. Bye.
Brilliant.